The people who quietly keep a company alive are usually the first ones shown the exit. Grant Holloway never imagined those words would describe his own life. For 16 years, he arrived before sunrise at North Axis Automation, a manufacturing technology company outside Seattle that powered hundreds of production lines across the country. Nobody applauded the engineer who prevented disasters before anyone noticed them. They only noticed when nothing went wrong. Grant preferred it that way. Every morning, after dropping his 12-year-old daughter Lily at school, he drove the same aging pickup truck through the company gates with a cup of black coffee balanced beside a weather notebook filled with years of handwritten observations. Those notes weren't company manuals. They were memories, small decisions, strange patterns, and lessons learned after countless sleepless nights solving problems no software documentation could explain. To everyone else, they looked like random scribbles. To Grant, they were the heartbeat of an entire system. Inside the headquarters, however, the atmosphere had changed. Bright promotional banners covered the lobby announcing a bold transformation. Screens displayed polished videos introducing North Axis's new vision, innovation through elite expertise. Employees whispered as consultants wearing tailored suits walked confidently through the halls carrying expensive laptops and presentations filled with impressive graphics. Grant watched quietly without judgment. Experience had taught him that impressive presentations rarely fix broken machines. Late that morning, an unexpected company-wide meeting filled the main auditorium. Hundreds of employees gathered while CEO Claire Whitmore stepped onto the stage with calm confidence. Behind her appeared a massive screen introducing a newly recruited team of industry experts. Their resumes included prestigious universities, international consulting firms, and awards that drew polite applause from the audience. Claire smiled as she described a future built on fresh thinking, advanced analytics, and modern leadership. Then her tone shifted. To move forward, she announced, we must also leave outdated methods behind. The room became noticeably quieter. Names began appearing on the screen. Grant's name appeared among them. For a brief second, no one moved. Several coworkers slowly turned toward him, their expressions filled with disbelief rather than pity. They all knew something Claire did not. Grant had never chased promotions or recognition. Whenever production stopped in the middle of the night, his phone was always the first one to ring. Grant stood without protest. He folded the paper agenda in his hands, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and walked calmly toward the exit. No dramatic speech. No argument. No anger. Only silence. As the auditorium doors closed behind him, he removed his employee badge and placed it neatly on the reception counter. Outside, cold autumn wind carried golden leaves across the parking lot. Grant remained still for a moment before climbing into his pickup. His phone vibrated. Dad, are we still getting pizza tonight? Lily's cheerful message appeared on the screen. Grant stared at the words longer than he expected. Money wasn't what frightened him. It was the thought of watching his daughter believe that doing honest work was no longer enough. He started the engine, forced a small smile no one could see, and drove toward the school, unaware that the decision celebrated inside North Axis that morning had already started a countdown no executive, consultant, or expert could stop. Sometimes losing the job that defines you is the only way to discover the people who truly do. The first week after leaving North Axis felt strangely quiet. Grant Holloway no longer woke before dawn to check overnight maintenance reports or answer emergency calls from anxious supervisors. Instead, he packed Lily's lunch, drove her to school, and spent long hours searching for temporary work. Seattle's autumn skies grew darker each morning, and so did the uncertainty that followed him home. His savings could cover a few months if they were careful. That meant no weekend pizza nights, no spontaneous movie trips, and no replacing the worn tires on his aging pickup truck. Grant never complained. He simply adjusted, just as he always had. Within days, he accepted small freelance repair jobs from local manufacturers. One morning he repaired an aging conveyor system in a family-owned warehouse. The next afternoon he recalibrated sensors inside a food processing plant. The work paid far less than North Axis had, But each completed job reminded him of something important. Machines still obeyed the same principles. They did not care about executive speeches or fashionable management trends. They responded only to patience, observation, and experience. Lily noticed the changes immediately, though she never mentioned the missing luxuries. One evening she quietly slid a folded envelope across the kitchen table. Inside were $38 she had earned babysitting for a neighbor. "We can use this until things get better," she said with an encouraging smile. Grant gently pushed the envelope back toward her. "You earned it. Keep saving for your camera." "But we're a team," Lily replied. Her words stayed with him long after she had gone upstairs to finish her homework. Across town, North Axis celebrated what executives proudly called a successful transformation. Claire Whitmore appeared in interviews describing the company's modernization strategy. Investors praised the hiring of elite specialists. Internal newsletters showcased redesigned dashboards, colorful performance charts, and optimistic forecasts. The consultants confidently replaced long-established operating procedures with standardized digital workflows. They assured management that every process had now been documented, optimized, and simplified. For nearly 4 weeks, everything appeared to justify Claire's decision. Production targets remained stable. Customer reports looked positive. Board members congratulated one another. The absence of Grant Holloway became nothing more than a forgotten personnel decision. Yet beneath those reassuring reports, small irregularities quietly accumulated. An overnight sensor briefly disconnected before automatically reconnecting. A robotic assembly line hesitated for 6 seconds longer than normal. A backup server completed synchronization several minutes late. Each event seemed insignificant on its own. The new experts categorized them as harmless anomalies generated during system upgrades. Automated monitoring software cleared every warning before sunrise. No one asked why those warnings had never appeared before. No one remembered that Grant used to investigate even the smallest inconsistency because he believed every major failure began as a minor whisper. On the evening of the 29th day, Grant sat on the porch with Lily as cold wind scattered amber leaves across the yard. She leaned against his shoulder while finishing a school's science project. "You miss your old job, don't you?" she asked softly. Grant looked toward the fading sunset before answering. "I miss taking care of something that depended on me." Neither of them noticed that, miles away inside North Axis's primary control center, another silent warning appeared across a monitoring screen. This time, instead of disappearing within seconds, the alert remained glowing red. The countdown had quietly reached its final hours. The most dangerous failures never arrive with an explosion. They begin with a warning everyone chooses to ignore. At exactly 6:17 the next morning, the first production line inside North Axis Automation stopped without explanation. A robotic arm froze in midair, holding an unfinished component above the conveyor. Operators assumed it was another routine software delay and restarted the sequence. The system recovered after 34 seconds. The incident was logged, categorized as a temporary synchronization error, and quickly forgotten. 20 minutes later, another facility nearly 60 miles away experienced the same interruption. By 8 o'clock, 3 separate manufacturing plants connected to North Axis's centralized control platform reported identical failures. Individually, the interruptions seemed manageable. Together, they formed a pattern nobody recognized. Inside the executive conference room, Claire Whitmore listened impatiently as members of the new engineering team projected colorful dashboards across the wall. Every graph suggested overall system health remained within acceptable limits. According to their analytics, nothing indicated a serious threat. "It's probably residual calibration noise from the migration," one consultant explained confidently. "The algorithms will stabilize automatically." Claire accepted the explanation and moved to the next agenda item. She had no reason not to. By noon, that confidence disappeared. Entire production cells began shutting themselves down as safety protocols activated across multiple customer sites. Conveyor belts halted simultaneously. Autonomous vehicles stopped in place. Packaging robots entered protective lock mode without receiving manual commands. Emergency hotlines flooded North Axis's support center faster than representatives could answer them. "What changed?" Claire demanded. Silence filled the room. Every engineer searched through thousands of lines of code. Nothing appeared wrong. Every backup server showed healthy. Every security scan returned normal. Every automated diagnostic insisted the infrastructure was functioning exactly as designed. Yet factories continued stopping one after another. Across Seattle, Grant was replacing a damaged motor inside a small warehouse when his former coworker Daniel Mercer called unexpectedly. "You watching the news?" Daniel asked. Grant tightened the final bolt before answering. "No." "Why?" "We're losing customers by the hour." Grant remained quiet. Daniel continued. "They've checked everything: databases, cloud servers, network routing, firmware updates. Nobody understands it." Grant looked toward the warehouse window where gray autumn rain had begun falling. "What exactly is failing?" he finally asked. "That's the problem," Daniel admitted. "Nothing is failing, and everything is failing." Grant closed his toolbox slowly. He knew that answer. It was the kind of sentence people only spoke when they were looking in the wrong place. Meanwhile, panic spread throughout North Axis headquarters. Support tickets multiplied faster than they could be assigned. Customer executives demanded immediate explanations. Some threatened lawsuits if production was not restored before the end of the day. Financial analysts began questioning whether the company's highly publicized modernization had introduced hidden instability. Claire ordered every specialist into the control center. Coffee cups accumulated beside glowing monitors. Voices grew louder. Charts became more complicated. Solutions became fewer. Late that afternoon, one senior consultant quietly admitted what nobody wanted to hear. "We can see the symptoms." He hesitated before continuing. "But we don't understand the behavior." Claire stared at the giant wall of blinking alerts. For the first time since announcing her ambitious transformation, uncertainty replaced confidence. Then another notification appeared. A fourth customer had gone offline. Seconds later, a fifth. Then a sixth. Across the enormous digital map covering the control room wall, green status indicators changed to flashing red one by one, spreading like a storm across the country. Standing in complete silence, Claire suddenly remembered the man who used to investigate problems before they became emergencies. For the first time in 30 days, Grant Holloway's empty office no longer looked like yesterday's decision. It looked like today's missing answer. When knowledge disappears, people don't notice the silence until they desperately need the voice that used to fill it. North Axis headquarters had never been so quiet. Hundreds of employees moved through the building, yet every hallway seemed weighed down by the same question nobody could answer. Why was a system that appeared technically healthy bringing entire factories to a standstill? The support center remained flooded with urgent calls. Customers no longer asked when the problem would be solved. They asked whether they should begin searching for another automation provider. Claire Whitmore stood inside the operations center, watching another row of status indicators flash crimson across the giant display wall. The optimistic confidence she had carried only weeks earlier had disappeared beneath exhaustion. She had spent nearly 20 consecutive hours reviewing reports, attending emergency meetings, and listening to explanations that grew less convincing with every passing hour. "We've verified every software deployment. We've restored yesterday's backups. We've replaced the cloud instances. We've rolled back the latest updates." Each report ended exactly the same way. The issue remains unresolved. Claire slowly turned toward the engineering managers. Who understood this platform before the restructuring? The room fell silent. Finally, Daniel Mercer cleared his throat. "Grant did." Claire frowned. "I know Grant maintained parts of the infrastructure." Daniel shook his head. "No." He paused carefully. "Grant understood all of it." Several longtime employees exchanged uneasy glances. One by one, they began speaking. He knew which customer sites reacted differently during winter humidity. He remembered equipment that had never been updated because replacing it would interrupt hospitals. He could hear a machine over the phone and recognize which sensor was drifting. He never followed the manuals, because he wrote half the workarounds that kept them accurate. Claire listened without interrupting. For the first time, she realized something unsettling. None of those details existed inside the company's documentation. Everything her new experts possessed was technically correct. Everything they lacked had lived inside one man's experience. Later that afternoon, Claire entered Grant's former office for the first time since his departure. The room had already been cleared. The shelves were empty. The desk looked untouched. Only a faint rectangle of dust revealed where a worn notebook had once rested for years. She opened the computer assigned to his workstation. Every project file had been archived exactly according to company policy. Nothing was missing. Yet somehow everything important felt absent. She quietly asked the IT administrator, "Did he leave any personal notes?" The administrator hesitated. "Only what policy required us to keep." "And the rest?" "He took his notebooks home. They were never company property." Claire closed her eyes for a brief moment. For weeks she had believed knowledge could simply be transferred into documents, databases, and dashboards. Now she understood the difference between recorded information and earned understanding. Meanwhile, across town, Grant finished another repair assignment and prepared to leave when his phone vibrated repeatedly. 3 missed calls. Then 4. Then 6. Every one of them came from former coworkers. He slipped the phone back into his pocket without returning any of them. At home that evening, Lily noticed him staring quietly out the kitchen window. "They need you, don't they?" she asked. Grant answered without turning around. "They need answers." "Isn't that the same thing?" He smiled faintly. "Not always." Before he could say anything else, the phone rang again. This time the caller ID displayed a number he had never expected to see again. Claire Whitmore. Grant looked at the screen as it continued ringing across the silent kitchen. Neither he nor the woman calling him realized that the next conversation would determine not only the future of North Axis, but also the kind of leader each of them would choose to become. Pride is expensive, but waiting too long to admit you're wrong can cost far more. The phone continued ringing across Grant Holloway's kitchen. Claire Whitmore's name remained illuminated on the screen while neither Grant nor Lily said a word. Finally, Grant answered. "This is Grant." For a moment, only silence came from the other end. Then Claire spoke, her voice calm but unmistakably strained. "Grant, this is Claire Whitmore." "I know." Another pause followed. "I realize this call is unexpected." Grant glanced toward Lily, who quietly carried the dinner plates to the sink, giving him privacy without leaving the room completely. "What can I do for you?" he asked. Claire took a slow breath. "We have a system failure affecting multiple customers. I heard. Our engineers have been working around the clock." "I'm sure they have." "They haven't found the cause." Grant didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the living room window and watched rain collect on the front porch railing. "What exactly do you need from me?" Claire finally spoke the words she had hoped to avoid. "We need your help." The sentence hung in the air longer than either of them expected. Grant remembered the auditorium. The applause. His name appearing on the screen. The explanation that North Axis needed experts prepared for the future, instead of employees attached to outdated methods. He felt no anger. Only distance. "You hired experts," Grant replied quietly. "They should know the system better than I do." Claire closed her eyes. "They know the documentation." Grant waited. "They don't know the platform." Another silence followed. Finally Grant asked the question she could not escape. "What changed between 30 days ago and today?" Claire answered honestly. "Nothing." Grant understood immediately. "Exactly." He wasn't trying to embarrass her. He was stating a principle every experienced engineer eventually learned. Machines rarely transformed overnight. The company had simply removed the person who recognized problems before they became visible. Claire lowered her voice. "I made the decision." "I know. And I was wrong." Those 4 words surprised Grant more than the phone call itself. Executives rarely admitted mistakes, especially during a crisis. He respected honesty, even when it arrived late. Still, he looked toward the family photographs covering the bookshelf. Pictures of Lily learning to ride her bicycle, school science fairs, camping trips after long weeks of overtime. He remembered birthdays interrupted by emergency calls from North Axis. Vacations shortened because production lines depended on him. He had given the company years of evenings, weekends, and holidays without ever asking for recognition. Now his first responsibility sat upstairs finishing homework. "My daughter comes first," he said gently. Claire answered immediately. "I'm not asking you to sacrifice that." Grant believed she meant it. She continued, "I'd like you to come in tomorrow morning." Not as an employee returning to his old desk. Grant remained silent. "As a consultant." "No promises," he replied. "I understand. I won't tell you I can fix it." "I understand. And if I come, I need complete access. No politics. No presentations. No one protecting their reputation while customers are losing millions." Claire didn't hesitate. "You'll have whatever you need." After ending the call, Grant remained standing beside the darkened window. Lily walked downstairs carrying 2 mugs of tea. "So?" she asked. Grant accepted one with a tired smile. "They finally asked for help." She looked at him for a long moment. "Are you going?" Grant stared into the steam rising from the cup before answering. "I'm not going back because they fired me." He paused. "I'm going because somewhere tonight thousands of people are waiting for machines they depend on to start working again." For the first time since leaving North Axis, his decision was no longer about losing a job. It was about deciding whether his knowledge belonged only to the people who had valued him, or also to the people who still depended on what he could do. Experience does not announce itself with loud promises. It quietly solves the problems everyone else calls impossible. Grant arrived at North Axis just after sunrise. The parking lot was overflowing with service vehicles, media vans, and customer representatives waiting for answers. Security guards who had once watched him leave with a cardboard box now opened the gate without hesitation. Inside the building, the atmosphere had changed completely. No one cared about job titles anymore. No one talked about transformation strategies. Every conversation revolved around one question. How do we stop the collapse? Claire Whitmore met Grant in the lobby. Neither of them mentioned the day he had been dismissed. She simply extended her hand. "Thank you for coming." Grant shook it once. "Show me the system." Within minutes they entered the operations center. Dozens of engineers sat in front of glowing monitors, exhausted after nearly 2 days without meaningful sleep. Several looked up as Grant walked in. Some smiled with relief. Others lowered their eyes, embarrassed by how events had unfolded. Claire addressed the room. "Grant has complete authority while he's here. If he asks for access, he gets it. If he asks a question, answer it. No exceptions." No one objected. Grant walked slowly around the room before touching a single keyboard. Instead of staring at dashboards, he watched people. He listened. He noticed which alarms everyone ignored because they had become constant background noise. Finally he stopped beside the main monitoring display. "Turn off every filtered alert." An engineer looked confused. "That will generate thousands of notifications." "I know. They're mostly meaningless." Grant looked directly at him. "You don't know that." Within seconds the screens filled with warning messages that had been automatically hidden by the new monitoring software. Grant read them silently. Then he asked another question. "When did you start filtering these?" "About 4 weeks ago." "The same week as the migration?" "Yes." Grant nodded. "I thought so." He requested access to historical maintenance records. The consultants quickly opened databases containing software revisions, cloud logs, and network analytics. Grant barely looked at them. Instead, he asked for something nobody else had requested. the equipment replacement records for every customer site over the last 5 years. The room became quiet. One engineer frowned. "Why would that matter?" Grant answered while scrolling through the reports. "Because systems don't fail in isolation." Minutes passed. Then suddenly he stopped. There. Everyone gathered behind him. One manufacturing facility had delayed replacing a legacy synchronization controller years earlier because shutting down production would have cost millions. Grant remembered personally designing a temporary compatibility routine that allowed the old controller to communicate with newer equipment. It had never been included in official documentation. The workaround had lived only inside his notebooks, and inside his memory. When the new monitoring platform filtered these alerts, Grant explained calmly, it also ignored the only warning that this controller was drifting out of synchronization. A consultant interrupted. "But that shouldn't affect every customer." Grant pointed at another screen. "It doesn't." He opened a second report. This compatibility routine became the timing reference for several connected facilities. The room fell silent. Like falling dominoes, one unnoticed timing error had slowly spread through the entire network until safety systems began shutting everything down to protect themselves. No cyber attack. No software corruption. No catastrophic hardware failure. Just one forgotten workaround that everyone assumed no longer mattered. Grant looked toward Claire. "I know where the failure started." For the first time in nearly 30 hours, hope replaced panic inside the operations center. The problem finally had a name. Now it needed a solution. Real leadership is measured not by who receives the credit when everything works, but by who stays until everything works again. Grant rolled his chair toward the central console and placed his worn notebook beside the keyboard. It was the same notebook he had carried for years, its corners bent, its pages filled with sketches, dates, handwritten diagrams, and observations that had never appeared in a single company database. Several younger engineers glanced at it with curiosity. One whispered, "That's it." Grant smiled faintly. "No." He opened the notebook. "This is just where I remembered to write some of it." The room settled into complete silence. Grant began issuing instructions with calm precision. Disconnect every synchronization routine linked to the legacy timing controller. Route those facilities into manual isolation. Disable automatic redistribution for the next 2 hours. Engineers hurried to execute each command. Within minutes another alarm sounded. A consultant looked up nervously. "We just lost another production line." Grant barely looked away from his screen. "Expected." The consultant stared in disbelief. "Expected? If we don't isolate the failure, it'll keep spreading." The room obeyed without further questions. For the next several hours, Grant moved from workstation to workstation, explaining not only what needed to be done but why. He described decisions made years earlier during emergency customer shutdowns, compromises that had allowed aging equipment to coexist with modern systems, and temporary fixes that had quietly become permanent because they had worked so well no one ever revisited them. The engineers listened carefully. For the first time since the crisis began, they were learning the story behind the technology instead of merely reading its documentation. Late that afternoon, Grant reached the final compatibility sequence. "This is the one." Claire stood beside him. "What happens now?" "We replaced the temporary bridge." "And if you're wrong?" Grant looked at the monitor. "Then every factory still connected to this network shuts down completely." Nobody spoke. Grant entered the new synchronization values one line at a time. He refused to copy and paste. He verified every command before pressing enter. The room seemed to stop breathing. 5 seconds. 10. 15. The warning indicators remained red. Then one status light quietly changed to green. A moment later another followed. Across the giant display wall, one customer site after another began reconnecting. Production lines restarted. Robotic arms resumed their programmed movements. Conveyor belts slowly accelerated. Support phones that had been ringing non-stop suddenly became quiet. An operator answered the next incoming call and smiled for the first time in 2 days. They're back online. Applause did not erupt immediately. Instead, everyone watched the monitors, afraid to believe what they were seeing. 5 minutes passed. No new failures appeared. 10 minutes. Still stable. 20. The final flashing alert disappeared from the wall. Only then did the room exhale. Some engineers clapped softly. Others simply lowered their heads in relief. Claire turned toward Grant. You just saved the company. Grant closed the notebook. No. He looked around the exhausted room. We all did. He paused before continuing. The difference is that today everyone finally understood what they were fixing. As employees gradually returned to their stations, Claire remained standing beside the wall of green indicators. The crisis had ended. But another realization had only begun. The company's greatest weakness had never been outdated technology. It had been believing that decades of experience could be replaced overnight without losing the wisdom hidden inside it. Watching Grant quietly pack his notebook instead of celebrating, Claire understood that restoring the system had been the easy part. Rebuilding trust would take much longer. The hardest apology is not spoken in private, it is made where everyone witnessed the mistake. 2 days after the crisis ended, the auditorium at North Axis filled once again. The same stage. The same rows of employees. The same projection screen where Grant Holloway's position had been eliminated only weeks before. This time, the atmosphere was entirely different. Nobody chatted while waiting for the meeting to begin. Nobody checked their phones. Everyone understood why they had been called together. Claire Whitmore stepped onto the stage without music or applause. She looked across hundreds of faces before speaking. 32 days ago, I stood here and announced that North Axis was moving toward the future. She paused. I believed modernization meant replacing old methods with new expertise. The room remained silent. I was wrong. The words echoed through the auditorium. Not because they were loud. Because they were honest. Claire continued. Our systems didn't fail because technology was outdated. She looked toward the front row, where Grant sat quietly beside Daniel Mercer. They failed because leadership underestimated the value of experience. No one looked away. We documented procedures. We upgraded software. We hired talented people. But we forgot that knowledge is more than information. She paused again. It is judgment. It is memory. It is responsibility earned one decision at a time. Claire stepped away from the podium and walked toward Grant. Every employee watched. When I approved Grant Holloway's dismissal, I believed I was making the best decision for this company. She stopped in front of him. I wasn't. Grant stood as she extended her hand. I'm sorry. There was nothing rehearsed about the moment. No photographers had been invited. No marketing team had prepared talking points. It was simply one leader accepting responsibility before the people affected by her decision. Grant shook her hand. I appreciate that. Claire smiled with visible relief before turning back toward the audience. Today we're announcing several permanent changes. The screen behind her displayed a new initiative. Knowledge Preservation Program. Every senior engineer would mentor younger employees. Critical operational knowledge would be documented alongside the reasons behind every major technical decision. Experienced employees would no longer be evaluated only by current output but also by how effectively they transferred understanding to the next generation. Then Claire looked back toward Grant. I've asked Grant to help design this program. Hundreds of eyes shifted toward him. Grant walked to the microphone slowly. I didn't come back because I wanted my old job. A few people nodded. I came back because systems serve people. He looked around the room. And companies only stay strong when people are willing to learn from one another. He smiled towards several younger engineers. One day you'll know things no manual can teach. His voice remained calm. When that day comes, don't keep that knowledge locked inside your head. Share it. So the next person won't have to learn the hard way. The audience stood almost instinctively. The applause grew gradually, not as celebration, but but as recognition. Grant wasn't being honored because he had rescued North Axis. He was being honored because he had reminded everyone what true expertise looked like. As the meeting ended, Claire quietly handed Grant a folder. Inside was a consulting agreement with flexible hours, full independence, and one handwritten note clipped to the front. "Thank you for helping us rebuild more than a system." Grant folded the note carefully and slipped it into the same notebook that had quietly protected the company for years. Some lessons belonged in technical manuals. Others deserved to be carried much closer to the heart. Success is rarely defined by the day the world finally notices you. More often, it is defined by the quiet evenings spent with the people who never stopped believing in you. 6 months later, North Axis Automation looked very different from the company Grant Holloway had left. The servers were faster. The monitoring systems were smarter. But the most important changes could not be measured by software updates or quarterly reports. Every major engineering project now paired experienced employees with younger specialists. Design meetings included one question that had never existed before. What are we assuming that only one person knows? The answer was never allowed to remain inside a single mind again. Grant never returned as a full-time employee. Instead, he visited the office 2 days each week as an independent consultant, spending most of his time mentoring engineers rather than solving emergencies. To his surprise, that became the work he enjoyed most. Watching someone else understand a problem before it became a crisis was even more satisfying than fixing the crisis himself. Claire Whitmore kept another promise as well. She never treated Grant as someone who had rescued the company. She treated him as someone whose experience deserved lasting respect. The relationship between them was no longer built on authority. It was built on trust. One Friday afternoon, Grant left the office earlier than usual. There were no emergency calls. No urgent meetings. No production failures waiting for him. Instead, he drove directly to Lily's middle school. She spotted him from across the parking lot and waved enthusiastically. "You made it!" "I said I would." She smiled. "You actually got here before everyone else." Grant laughed. "I've learned being early is easier than apologizing for being late." Together they walked into the school gymnasium where students displayed science projects they had spent months preparing. Lily led him proudly toward her presentation. Its title immediately caught his attention. "Knowledge shared is knowledge protected." His eyes widened. "You borrowed my words." "I improved them," she answered with a grin. Her project demonstrated how information passed from one generation to another prevented mistakes, whether in engineering, medicine, aviation, or everyday life. As judges stopped to ask questions, Lily answered each one confidently. Grant stood quietly at the back of the room. Not because she needed his help. Because she no longer did. Driving home that evening, Lily looked out the window before breaking the comfortable silence. "Dad?" "Yes? Are you happy?" Grant considered the question carefully. Months earlier he might have answered with numbers. Income. Career. Security. Now the answer felt much simpler. "I think I finally understand what success is." She waited. "It isn't being the smartest person in the room. It isn't having the biggest title. It isn't proving someone wrong." He smiled as the afternoon sunlight stretched across the highway. "It's having work you're proud of." He glanced toward Lily. "And still getting home in time for the moments that matter most." She reached over and squeezed his hand for just a second before looking back out the window. Grant realized that losing his job had never been the end of his story. It had only forced him to discover the part of his life that had always deserved first place. Sometimes the greatest achievement is not rebuilding a broken system. Sometimes it is rebuilding your priorities before life does it for you. And in the quiet space between a fulfilled career and a daughter's grateful smile, Grant Holloway finally found something far more valuable than recognition. He found the life he had almost forgotten he was working to protect.